is it defines where to take an ActionScript object and how to configure it, and how to configure it in a hierarchy. So basically, the tags that you have mapped to ActionScript objects, the attributes mapped to properties, and we usually use this to describe sort of UI, but you can use it to describe anything, and it provides really a consistent way of approaching things. So what happens is, when you take something like this little example that I have here, what it means is that there is actually a panel object that owns an HBox and a data grid and a label and a checkbox, and that specifies the hierarchy. Now, the building blocks that we have today in Flex are things like data grids and panels and buttons and things like that. And so that's what the MXML typically represents. But what we're doing with Gumbo is actually providing a set of blocks that represent very, very low-level graphics. We've basically taken the Flash imaging API and created a set of objects that encapsulate that functionality. So you can take things, you can say, here's a graphic and it has an ellipse and it has a gradient fill. And what that turns into is a set of objects that represent all of that. And then what you get when you render it is something that looks like this. So the different constructs that we provide in Gumbo are things like we have a group. And that's really sort of the core component, and it's the container for all of the other graphics. But it's also a container for other content. So you can, for example, have a group and you can have an ellipse in there and you can have a button or a data grid or whatever else you want. There are, of course, constructs for all of the different graphics, core graphics, the things you do with graphics, like a path, a line. There's also things like a bitmap graphic, text graphic, and primitive shapes like ellipses. There are also ways of representing all the different ways that you fill and stroke a graphic. You've got solid colors, you have linear gradients, you've got gradient strokes, bitmap fills, things like that. And we also model a lot of the other pieces of the graphic subsystem, things like filters. And of course, all of these things are Flex objects, so you can data bind all of them, which is really exciting. One of the interesting things that Justin didn't mention about the graphics API is that there, in addition to the draw triangles, there's sort of a, I can't remember, it's like draw path. And basically you get a bunch of components, but you can then actually modify it. And the way that actually came about was I had done my initial prototype, and I showed it to one of the engineers on the Flash player, and he said, how are you doing that? Because I had these graphics like an ellipse and stuff, and I was data binding and making the ellipse grow and making the radial gradient swirl around. And I said, well, I have these objects, and each one, when it gets told to, something's changed, it has to clear the display. And he said, wow, we could just make an API that allows you to not have to redraw it, because we can do that. No one had ever asked for it before. So, so we've gotten those new sort of more optimized way of dealing with graphics that have really been designed for this, and this has been designed for the Flash player. So it allows you a lot more expressivity. Now, when you create all of these objects, what Flex does is it optimizes it. So it doesn't necessarily create a display object for every ellipse. It basically analyzes what you've done and figures out the minimum number of display objects and creates those on the fly. Now, to go with this, this graphics format, which is really a core part of Flex. As I said, you can have a group and it can have a button. You can have an ellipse and you can data bind any of the properties it has. We've taken that graphics language and created a subset that we call FXG. And what that is it's just the graphic stuff, and it takes out a bunch of constructs like data binding. So it's more of a fixed schema XML format that we've defined that represents all of the graphics that we can do, but it describes it in a way that can be understood by tools that don't actually understand anything about Flash or ActionScript. And the real goal there was to have all of the Creative Suite tools that are used to author static graphics be able to understand this format so that you can go into something, Photoshop or Fireworks or Illustrator, and draw graphics using the tools that a designer knows, and they can say, save as FXG, and it'll save it as an XML format that is natively understood by Flex. And so what I'd like to do is show you that. Of course, the big motivator for this was a new tool that we're developing called ColdThermo, which is a tool that sort of sits sort of between the Creative Suite apps that know about static graphics and Flex Builder. And it works on MXML and Flex projects. It's built on Eclipse, but it really sort of has that middle ground. And I'll show you a demo of Thermo in a second. And so what I'd like to do is show you how FXG works. And what I can do is go here into Fireworks. This is Fireworks CS4, and we've released this on the web, and open up a ping file. And let's try and get the layers panel here. Can't find my layers. Oh, I just unchecked it. Thank you, Matt. There it is. So you can see it has a bunch of objects, a lot of vector artwork, and maybe a little bit of bitmap artwork. And what I can do is I can just come up here to Commands and say Export to FXG, and put it right on the desktop there. And I'll call this 360 Flex Rocks. And it will export that. And let me come over here. Thermo. And this is our i6 build. And what I'll do is I'll just create a blank project. And I will say import this FXG file. And you'll see we've brought it in. Now, as I said, Thermo is built on top of Eclipse, and actually on the Flex Builder code base, so it actually has a bunch of features of Flex Builder. So we can go to the code workspace and actually see the FXG code. So all of that has been converted into XML format that is compatible with Flex. We've read that in, and now it's become full XML, MXML. Go in and start data binding. I can use this as skins in the new component architecture. But this gives you an idea of some of the features. You've got radial gradients. But basically, we've designed it as a complete graphics language that the Creative Suite tools can use to interchange seamlessly with developers using Thermo and Flex Builder. So I'm pleased to announce that Deepa created, I don't know if this is technically a spec or another white paper, which of those digits that I showed increments, but posted this morning the FXG 1.0 spec. And it's not only an excellent description of FXG in the MXML graphics format, but it also really describes very, very completely the Flash rendering model. So I would recommend checking that out. And learning more about FXG and Flex graphics. Now, when we started, we're an open source project, but there's a lot of activity in the community. And one of the things people asked when we announced that we were doing these graphics for Flex was, there are other projects out there such as Degrafa. What about that? Why are you guys doing this? And we've been working very closely with them, and we're pleased to announce today that we're coming together, and Degrafa and Flex are going to be collaborating to create a better solution. So I'd like to invite Juan and Tom up.